Welcoming all our viewers to today's International Affairs. This is being broadcast from the SATV's Gulshan studio. My name is Shamsul Alam Panto. As I bring you the breaking updates, let me begin with one. Iran is allowing 15 ships to cross through the Strait of Hormuz. This is the first as they have done in the last 37 days. The war has entered in its 5th to 6th week, and this time around we are seeing how Donald Trump's ultimatums are completely failing one after the other, as the US president is adding on one day by day to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for all ships as it was before the war. Before I begin our discussion today, let me introduce my panel. Here in the studio, we have Ahmed Alvi, who is of course joining in today as our international affairs commentator. I welcome you on to the program. Alongside, we will have our geopolitical correspondent, Norman Floyd Barnes, who is joining us from District of Columbia, Washington, in the United States of America. I want to begin with Norman. There are some immediate updates that I have provided, one of them including the 15 ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz in the last 24 hours. I'm sure there are many more updates that you want to share with us here on this program. Norman, what are the updates that you have on your desk?
Yes, today is Monday. We have here as part of what we call Easter Monday, as part of a holiday period. Congress is still out celebrating holiday, and the president is still making his threats towards the strait. He's now saying that Tuesday, tomorrow, the U.S. will hit the infrastructure, critical infrastructure of Iran if they do not open it up. I'm hearing that Iran is stating that they are not considering his threats valid, and they will continue with their process. And right now we're sitting around waiting to see exactly what effect that has on the markets. Thank you.
Of course. What we realize is that even after adding on a one day, there seems to be no kind of recourse between the two sides, between the two nations. Not only so, Donald Trump even last week had provided a 48-hour ultimatum, and because of that would have ended today on a Monday. And tomorrow, adding on to that, he has extended that deadline up until Eastern Time, 8 p.m. on Tuesday. Following these developments in the international field, I want to come into a studio with Ahmed Alvi. You were hearing, Norman, on how Donald Trump is trying to extend this time, purposefully giving Iran more time to understand that they must open the Strait of Hormuz. However, this war imposed on Iran, it would be the second time in Iran's history that they had to deal with such, and making sure that every U.S. asset in the region is now a legitimate target. Given that, how are you observing this war? It is in the 5th week.
I think you brought up a really interesting fact. I think obviously the Strait of Hormuz plays a very key role, given how basically millions of barrels of oil is transported there daily. And interesting enough, Iran has a huge control over it, obviously the full control over it. And America, and I think America sent aircraft carriers.
Right,
two, right? And they haven't been successful, to say the least, right? And I think Trump is giving out threats, and this is quite usual of him. But I think they're also getting more harsh. It's because he understands it's not working. Iran, or the people, they have this martyrdom within them, within their personality, within like the culture. So for them, it's not as bad for them if like they would lose their lives, but it's for the cause, it's for the country, so in that aspect, I think Trump, like these threats of basically raining hellfire in the next 48 hours, to some extent they're empty threats. Maybe there will be some bombing, but it will be to the same extent as it was before. It wouldn't be something extensive or something different. And as for the US bases, as they should be targeted,
27 in the region, 27 bases combined in various countries.
And I think since if they are on war, because officially they aren't, like just to clarify, officially they aren't. Congress hasn't declared war. So so you can call it war, but technically it isn't war. So until that happens, and this is just a casualty of war, the air bases. The bases getting destroyed is just part of the casualties.
Right.
So since no civilians are getting, if civilian deaths occur, and if that increases, there's an issue. But this is just a cost of war.
Of course. There is an issue that you had raised up, that Congress hasn't declared war yet. This is the U.S. Congress. I want to ask about this issue with Norman Floyd Burns. I believe that he would agree with this statement as well. Adding on, there is a news coming from the presidential office in Iran. It says that the Strait of Hormuz will reopen for transit only when transit revenues are used to compensate for damages from the war. This is according to Iran's presidential office. I want to ask Norman, there is a very swift change that we see in the narratives that is coming out, especially with Iran. They are looking forward to opening the strait, but with adding a toll for the ships to cross through. And especially on that notice, Congress hasn't declared a continuous war, or the U.S. hasn't declared it from the Congress's office. What is your observation regarding this statement, Norman?
Yes, the Iranian government has stated that the strait is open for friendly countries, which do not include the United States and Israel. And and everyone must pay a toll, which is constitute funds that is not petrodollars. Basically, we're looking at the Chinese currency is can be used,
One.
and also other means can be used, but not the U.S. dollars, not the petrodollars. So what in essence is happening is basically is showing that the strait is not closed, but is not open for free passage and passage of vessels that is associated with the United States and Israel. So so I suspect you're going to see some countries talk to Iran and negotiate some terms so they can start moving their vessels through the area. Will be a slap in the face to the United States, particularly President Trump, in regards to what he wants to do. And as we stated in the previous our previous meetings, that the world is now shifting towards an alternatives, and it looks like the alternative is going to be something outside of the current situation and the fees and the charges that dealing with the petrodollar. So now we're looking at the true battle, what we call the economic battle, is going on regarding the United States and Iran. So the story is now getting very interesting. The pressure is now on the United States to convince its partners and allies not to get involved in this. But right now, the alternatives seem to have the advantage. Thank you.
Of course, important comments made by Norman Floyd Burns. I want to include some of the news aspects regarding this emergency situation in the Middle East. Almost 11 Israelis were reported injured and 4 others were missing following an Iranian missile strike in Haifa, which is a port city in northern Israel, the country's national emergency service, according to them. I want to add on to this news as well that there has been a suspected scare at Israel's Ben Gurion airport near Tel Aviv, where they evacuated employees after detection of a smoke coming from an unidentified package. These are stories that are coming online with various media's news reports that suggests that the escalation between Iran and Israel is still continuing. Given the fact that the strait may open in the conditions where friendly nations are providing some kind of monetary benefit towards Iran, how are you seeing this? The long-lasting or the longevity of the state of Israel, it is being questioned. Their leader, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has issued a genocide against the Palestinian people. What is your say regarding this fact, Ahmed Alvi, also by the fact that Iran is standing up for Palestinian people?
I really like the fact that Iran is standing up because others aren't, and that's quite visible to be honest. You just have to open your eyes. And the fact that these attacks are happening on Israel, it's not surprising given the current situation, right? And there are other militant activist groups, and obviously some other countries are reacting, right, to their attacks. And that's completely understandable in a sense of defending themselves, right? Even if it includes more deaths, unfortunately. Benjamin Netanyahu, basically what was really interesting is even if America puts boots on the ground, Israel is committed not to send any send any soldiers or any
that
IDF.
was the story that took to storm on social media as well, in which U.S. boots may be on the ground, but Israel shall not
but
be sending any
you're
more
right.
forces.
So then you can understand, all right, so is it Israel just wants to be in the, is it that Israel wants to benefit from war rather than participate in it? And so there would be more questions. And regarding what Mr. Norman said, the battle of the currency also places a huge issue. And I think Donald Trump understands this. I think it puts a pressure on the US economy, puts a pressure on the dollar, and it's basically a shifting of power. And Iran is also benefiting greatly from all the commission, the fees, like from the toll booth, right, which is the Strait of Hormuz. And I think, so to some extent, there are some people who are financially benefiting a lot from this war. And clearly, America is not. And so I think, and in every way, basically the whole world is getting affected. But some are benefiting, but America is not just staying neutral, because even though you have to understand that the oil supply or the oil glut that is caused, not oil glut, but like, right, the crunch that's caused by the Strait of Hormuz, they also took over Venezuela, right, a couple of months ago. And obviously that was an oil, that was regarding oil, that was just regarding oil. This is something.
The largest number of oil reserves actually belong to Venezuela.
Venezuela, right. So, but America hasn't been developing in that sense, especially the relationship with everyone. The fact that if they could, the fact that they would actually ask a European member, right, to actually join them, right, in, let's say, boycotting the Strait of Hormuz, it would be against them. It would be, for a European country, it would be like shooting themselves in the foot.
Of course. That is important for you to bring up Europe in this regard. We've seen how Emmanuel Macron, president of France, is not seeing eye to eye with US President Donald Trump's vision for the Middle East and for the greater Israel, as well as Iran, and how Iran has handled this issue. And I want to ask Norman Floyd Barnes, given that you were hearing regarding these issues that we were discussing in the studio, I want to ask about the Global South with you, Norman. The Global South does include the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, as well as South Africa. And all of these nations are now posing some kind of threat towards the petrodollar, or the dollar that has been tied with crude export out of the Middle East. And that is a new venture that is opening. The handling of this situation by the US authorities as well as the administration. The long-term effects, of course, Russia and China play a huge role when it comes to this kind of discussion. I want to know how you felt about the BRICS nation, what they are trying to do, and how they are coming up on top over the United States of America. Norman.
Yes, thank you for the question. The issue with the BRICS nations has always been something of we consider emerging economies. Now China is also involved in that. Now we are seeing an opportunity where the Iranian government and the BRICS nations has found a Achilles heel to the West, and particularly the United States economy. The petrodollar has been the number one, I guess, the number one source of movement of funds globally. In response to the petrodollar, the Iranians has using this toll gate And I suspect we're going to see similar actions in the area around the Red Sea. And also the movement of commerce through the world. There's going to be a shift. Uh, I suspect the BRIC nations are now going to, who provide a lot of resources, trade, and commerce globally. Brazil is another country. I suspect you will possibly see a shift in currency demands for transactions. So basically, what I'm saying is basically do not be surprised if we are starting to see countries demanding alternative pay for their goods and services outside of the petrodollar. The Chinese currency is now right now being used for the toll for the strait. I suspect you will see more of that happen with the countries of the BRIC countries, Brazil. You may even see the same thing happen with your country close to you, India, in terms
Right.
of transactional currency. So I suspect that the countries are now emerging as a challenge to the petrodollar, an alternative, as the Chinese say, in terms of paying for goods and services. And the cost of that will affect the value of the petrodollar. Uh, we're seeing it now in oil. The oil prices is going up again. We're going to see that rise until this situation stabilizes and countries decide exactly how they want to pay for goods and services. So I think the alternative is again in the advantage because of this conflict, because of the position of the United States, and because of the threats, because of the tariffs. Now countries are now reconsidering how they want to negotiate business. And that business is gearing towards the BRICS countries and their use of their funds as an alternative to the petrodollar. So my closure on this is basically look for a change in terms of how people pay for goods and services, and it's not going to be in the favor of the United States and the petrodollar.
Of course, very important issues being raised by Norman Floyd regarding the petrodollar, regarding the movements, how people and many nations are now considering to use a different method or different currency of payment, which is now being given more acceptance worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to take a short commercial break. We shall be back very shortly. Hello and welcome to International Affairs, and my name is Shamsul Alam Panto.
I don't see an easy resolution to this because every slight deviation from the plan,
opening an open war conflict with them.
Testing nuclear missiles.
Russia's announcement of these supposedly successful testing.
Special and exclusive footage that is being played on SATV's screen.
Really coming to terms with Hamas.
Damage estimated between this entire issue.
President Trump is expected to hold bilateral talks.
Preserving biodiversity and tackling climate change.
We cannot protect the planet before we negotiate peace.
Where is it going? Is it understanding the needs of its people before the needs of this global world?
For China to come to agreement,
They will face better projects.
With presidency of China and President Lee of South Korea.
Trump's White House that is in favor of these things.
simply not enough action being taken to address the problem of fossil fuels.
What their plan initially is towards the Caribbean, a place that has been met with two types of disasters.
Bangladeshi students at the same level of opportunity internationally and domestically.
International Affairs. Watch every Sunday to Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back on International Affairs. My name is Shamsul Alam Panto. Alongside, I have Ahmed Alvi in the studio as our International Affairs commentator, as well as Norman Floyd Barnes joining from Washington, D.C. there is a news that I want to read out before I begin the discussion once more. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov agreed in a phone call to uphold fairness on matters of principle and adopt an objective and balanced approach. As members of the permanent UN Security Council, they were discussing the impending vote on a draft resolution on the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I want to ask Ahmed Alvi. Various currencies are now being used to understand international trade, international world order. And not only so, the Chinese yuan and the Russian rubles, the currencies, they are gaining some kind of traction as a currency that can be used for international payments. Now, various nations, when they adopt such a rule, it of course moves away from the dollar and dependence on the dollar. How do you see this? The dependency on the dollar is being changed, and US really needs to rethink their national and foreign policy. You've seen almost 50 states going into the No Kings rallies almost on the third round just last week. Of course, US President Donald Trump wanted regime change in Iran. However, inadvertently, he has caused the very same rhetoric in his own nation.
Okay, so I don't think Donald Trump actually think things through, right? So yes, he wanted change, but for him, he actually promised a lot of things. Let's be honest. Like he promised, one of his things regarding him becoming president was that there would be no more wars. That was one of his promises.
Campaign promises.
Right?
Yes.
And he ended up creating one. So that's quite interesting. But the other thing that's interesting is if the petrodollar is actually one of America's financial weapons, right? So whenever the war of like Ukraine and Russia happened, America immediately hit them with sanctions, right? Destroying the ruble, okay? And they did the same thing with the Iranian currency.
$1 equals to a million Iranian in Iranian currency.
It's right, it's obnoxious, it's crazy. But I think what's important is other countries are realizing like we're giving one country way too much power over the global economy. Because the currency is like the identification of the country in terms of, right, like how it's represented. Now, if some other country can destroy that overnight, right, then you realize like when is it their turn, right? Like first it was then Russia, now Iran, and then some other country might be next. And I think other countries are understanding this slowly, and they also want to be free from this grasp of like economic control. So, in that sense, I think whatever Trump wanted to do or whatever wanted to happen, I think exactly the opposite is happening.
And that is actually affecting the campaign base that he holds very dear, making America great again. The MAGA fan base that he has in the United States, that's being affected. And you did mention Ukraine, Russia very slightly, and that is what I want to talk about with Norman Floyd Barnes. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, increasingly finds himself visiting various Middle Eastern nations. A day or two ago, it was Turkey, and today it is Damascus, Syria. And his movement around this region does show how leaders are now looking forward into a world where collaboration is very important to have an upper edge regarding various confrontations. I want to ask Norman Floyd, how do you see the leader of Ukraine? Of course, when Donald Trump took to House in his second term, Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky was more or less bullied in the White House. And today, if you look in contrast, 4.5 years as it approaches the Ukraine-Russia conflict, eastern Ukraine and its citizens have defected themselves. Some have defected into being called Russians. So I want to know from Norman, how do you see the movement of Volodymyr Zelensky in this new perspective in the Middle East as well? Norman.
Yes, the president of Ukraine, he's a survival person. He sees the, let's just say, the tea leaves. He understands that the United States support is questionable. Its continued involvement is questionable. So the situation by diverting his support, the United States support to their war, you notice now that that support has now shifted towards Israel and its mission towards Iran. So he is now looking at other countries to get establish credibility, try to get funds and economic support so he can continue his battle with Russia and provide support for Europe and other countries. So basically, he's trying to basically call fundraise for his cause and the endless war to deal with that, to stave and to put off Russia. His presentation is basically stating that if we fail, Europe fails. So you must support us in order to protect yourself. You're noticing the United States is now backing off of Europe. They just mentioned about NATO. They're talking about other things. They have a new agenda about the Western Hemisphere. All indications is that the future of the U.S. direct involvement in Europe is going to somehow shift. They'll still be connected, friendly as an allies, but their support and actual involvement is going to shift towards the interests of the United States, which is now not Europe-based. So
Not Europe-based.
they are looking like other countries have to figure out an alternatives. He is understanding that he has to do something for himself and not depend on the U.S. dollars, Congress, and it's particularly this current administration. Yes, he has friends in the United States. Yes, he's getting support from Congress, but the current administration is diverting their funds to other things, as we say, make America great again, and the agenda of the current administration. That agenda do not include Ukraine. So he has to look for other means to support his action to preserve his country and to stave off Russia's pressure on taking over the country. So what you're seeing is that, just that. He's looking for other alternatives, knowing that the United States is not going to provide a endless line of support for them.
Of course,
Thank you.
and your observations are very important for the discussions that we have here in this studio. Let me bring it out that the geopolitical situation earlier on, when it was only Ukraine and Russia fighting their war, there was a Pentagon memo that says that the U.S. shall not provide Ukraine with some missiles, which had been very important. But however, now we see an extended effort and the cause and effect of this happening. Those are, of course, the Patriot missiles. The Pentagon said that they will not be supplying to Ukraine to fight their war on Russia. On the other side, the very nation that said that now finds itself in a war in the Middle East. So what Norman was saying, that right now the credibility is an issue, credibility of the United States as they would be allied to any kind of nation. Of course, beginning of the year, we've seen how the U.S. forces has abducted leader of a sovereign nation, Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. And that was the beginning of a new normal in which even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, after 4 years of U.S. support, does not see to find any kind of credibility amongst the United States of America. Hence his movement around various Middle Eastern nations who are now understanding what U.S. security guarantees actually mean. I'm trying to be very sarcastic. However, I want to know how you feel about it, the cause and effect, reaction and a counter reaction to all of these issues.
I think I really liked how Mr. Norman said, said about the fundraising issue, right? And I think one of the reasons why America is backing off, maybe not from maybe from Europe and NATO from other reasons, but mainly from mainly from Ukraine, because I think America and United States have been drawing up peace plans. I mean, yes, Zelensky doesn't particularly like them and Kiev doesn't approve, but they do, and the plan does include receding territory, right? And Zelensky has been against that. Russia is actually open to peace talks if those territories are receded.
Right.
So right now, because the question lies in, because America can't supply Ukraine forever. You can't be sending them billions of dollars every month,
right.
And it's the same stalemate, right? Like there's no inch. It doesn't move an inch. It's the same result. So I think Congress is basically even understanding like, okay, is there a point to this, or are we just basically throwing our money down the drain, right? And Zelensky, I think even he understands, okay, basically this source or basically these investors are basically getting tired. So should I just ask the other ones, right? And that's why maybe he's going to the Middle East. And maybe he's also understanding that people are losing the attention, the spotlight that was given to Ukraine, Russia, right? Because yes, even though we're talking about it right now, remember, it's a secondary issue. All the headlines will talk about Iran and America and Israel and everything that's going on, right, in the Middle East.
Right.
Like Ukraine, Russia would be what on like page 6, right?
Based on the facts of other frontiers around the world.
I'm saying on a general, on their newspaper it's different. I'm saying on a general scale, right? So on that scale, I think it's not as important, but even Zelensky and Kiev needs to understand that they are not as strong as Russia, and this supply crunch that is happening, especially of the oil, right, in the Strait of Hormuz, this actually benefits Russia. And this actually helps them, right? Because and I don't think even Zelensky is properly understanding that at this point, Russia is actually becoming more favorable, and they're actually losing. And even if they might not lose more land, they're losing that morale. And and I think Spain also sent some couple hundreds of millions of dollars. But at one point, even Europeans and other countries will understand, like, we can't be burning up funds. Especially, you can see if there's an inflation happening across the world because of oil prices rising, which is actually one of the main causes of like global inflation, right? And so you can see like, okay, so the people in my country they're unable to afford basic needs, right?
Right.
And in the meanwhile, I'll be sending money to some foreign war, which might not even end this year, not even next year, where the defending country that is losing doesn't even want to come to peace terms, like, because they want equality, I guess, in the terms. But you have to understand, like one side, Russia is a lot more powerful, and if the war just ends, right, and Ukraine keeps their land, then all the soldiers, like the Russians lost, that was like futile, right? You can't explain that to the people. You can't be like, we fought a war for so long, right? We lost so many people and resources, and we didn't gain anything. You can't explain that to your people.
Of course, and that is important. I want to draw a contrast between the aggression towards Iran and, of course, the Ukraine-Russia war. And I want to ask this to Norman Floyd Burns. We know very slightly that the Nord Stream pipeline has been blown right before this Ukrainian and Russian aggression that we've seen for the last 4 years. This important pipeline would connect Russia's gas exports towards Europe and various European nations. We still do not know. There's an international investigation into wanting to find out who were responsible for blowing up this pipeline. Of course, once again, war, economics, aggression, and the currencies, this all coming back in a very similar pattern when you look at Iran as well as Israel and the US. So I want to ask you, energy dependency, energy scarcity, these two contrasts are now playing into global geopolitical conflicts around the globe. And not only so, another question I might add, that when the US president gives the order to capture the sovereign state of another nation, that actually opens up the roadmap to a worldwide escalation, worldwide conflict. I want to get your ending statements regarding the ones that I've picked up. Norman.
Yes, as we see, the trend is showing that what matters in regards to the world is basically who controls the water, food, shelter, and then energy sources. That's it. Who controls that? So as of the situation with Venezuela, the U.S. taking over Venezuela swiftly and challenging the sovereignty, other countries are looking at, hey, that could happen to me too. I don't know. So we're gonna have to do something to ensure that we can protect ourselves. So the alternatives are now is that, hey, we need to shore up our military, our resources, and our energy sources. So, we can't afford not to have food. We can't afford anybody to control our water sources, and definitely the energy. The energy is very important as we see the oil rules the world right now. And the shelters basically a superior military, a superior country may come in and bomb our infrastructure, deal with our infrastructure. So how do we deal with that? So we have to look at alternatives. And the BRICS nations are putting up a compelling resume to ensure that, that they can ensure that you have your infrastructure there. China is basically, they build infrastructure, global infrastructure. So the countries of the BRIC, they're looking at their own economy, so that you can ensure that the food, and also China and Russia has military sources that can help the BRIC nations. These are all contrasts to what is happening now with the petrodollar in the United States. So the change is coming. The alternatives, they are looking at other things outside of dependency on the United States. And right now, as the United States is trending towards a new frontier, how they want to deal with things, how they want to do business, alternatives have to be in place. They have to, people have to understand that I may not be able to afford what the United States is offering, but I can afford what the Chinese is offering. So do I have a relationship with both, or do I just go on one side? So I think the issues we have in here in the States is basically the United States and the Western world wants everything to be Western. You depend on us, we do everything, we have to control everything. But the situation has now created, because of our power and sources, we do not have the stranglehold over people, and people understand that they have to look at alternatives. And so that's what we're right now. So we're looking at a trend change and a change to a new multipolar world. So that is what's happening now. The shift, it's a shift. I'm not saying we're going to quit one, but we need alternative. Maybe I can afford it and we have a relationship, but maybe I can't. So we still have to live another day.
Right. I must thank Norman Floyd Barnes for very important updates, discussions, insights as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a short break. Afterwards, we will see the effects of it, of this war on our nation. Do stay tuned. At 2 p.m. only on SATV and SATV Digital. Hello and welcome to International Affairs, and my name is Shamsul Panto.
I don't see an easy resolution to this because every slight deviation from the plan,
opening an open war conflict with them,
testing nuclear missiles,
Russia's announcement of these supposedly successful testing,
Special and exclusive footage that is being played on SATV's screen.
Really coming to terms with Hamas.
Damage estimated between this entire issue.
President Trump is expected to hold bilateral talks.
preserving biodiversity and tackling climate change.
We cannot protect the planet before we negotiate peace.
Where is it going? Is it understanding the needs of its people before the needs of this global world?
For China to come to agreement,
They will face better projects.
With President Xi of China and President Lee of South Korea.
Trump's White House that is in favor of these things.
simply not enough action being taken to address the problem of fossil fuels.
What their plan initially is towards the Caribbean, a place that has been met with two types of disasters.
Bangladeshi students at the same level of opportunity internationally and domestically.
Welcoming all our viewers back onto the last segment of International Affairs. We were discussing various war fronts, various causes and effects, various issues from around the globe that have huge significance in today's world. However, more often or so, some of the least developing nations or LDCs are affected around the globe. Some of these countries do include our very nation, Bangladesh, who is now trying to save itself, create an impact on the world economic scale. However, the Middle Eastern war between US, Israel and Iran has caused a very high amount of distress amongst our citizens here in Bangladesh. Continuously, we see the queues at the petrol stations, at the filling stations, stretch out for more than a kilometer. It is important to understand the goal of rationing. However, the scare behind not having or not finding enough energy or enough oil in the coming days is a matter of societal concern, as people are looking forward to welcoming the Bengali New Year later in this month. How much of this issues will affect common Bengalis? And that is the topic I want to ask in the studio with Ahmed Alvi. The impacts of global warfare, how it puts on to Bangladesh. Let me give you a contrast here. When the Ukrainian war with Russia had begun, 89 BDT, Bangladeshi Taka, was the price of octane back then, and it had increased to 128, with slightly going down over several months. However, now we see that there are queues, there are the depots are trying to ration out various petrol stations. Say, for example, if a filling station required 20,000 liters, they'd be supported with 10,000 liters, half of their capacity. So all of this combined, where does Bangladesh stand in your perspective?
Okay, so there's something also that should be admitted.
Please.
You can actually get a full tank. You just have to bribe them, unfortunately. But that entire system is kind of in the dust. But the point is, I think people need to be more aware, right? Like, rather than just giving out policies just to restrict people, right, from living out their daily life. Like, if you don't understand the global impact that's going on, right, and the reason why oil prices are rising, like why we have to ration now, because I don't think the general citizen actually has an idea on why all this is happening. For them, it's just something bad is that, oh, there's a war abroad and we're getting affected somehow. I think people need to understand, like, that we are in also a position where we can't actually get our resources outright, and there has been some barriers, you know, from Qatar and from also Iran. And I think the point is, even though we need to ration more, I think we need to maybe walk more, take more rickshaws, but also understand, like, rationing is, like, it's something we need right now because we have to. But the way we should look at it, at least from my perspective, is even though we might lose this resource in the coming days, but it hasn't happened for now. So until that happens, we need to, let's say, ration.
Look for alternatives, of course.
Right. But we also remember in COVID when people panicked, right? And they would stock up. But it was the worst that people feared that never really occurred, right?
Right.
So I think in the similar sense, the worst won't occur that the people are imagining. So I don't think people should just tend down, not even their travels, but just maybe the usage of, let's say, cars and buses, and unless if it's like work related, or unless if it impacts them financially, let's say. So they should cut down on their leisure when it's related to, I guess, the oil supplies.
Of course, and it's not just that you mentioned it somehow affects us. There is another plateau, whether you would feel comfortable talking about it just very briefly. The Middle Eastern nations that holds a huge number of expatriate Bengali population who are sending remittances to Bangladesh. Closing down of businesses there would have a negative effect of the remittances inflow into Bangladesh. How would you see this?
Right. So remittance inflow actually plays a great part in our economy. It actually fuels our government revenue in a great way. And that is actually an issue. My main issue would be actually if something worse happens, right, for their lives. Economically speaking, it's unfortunate, but so far, I guess this is the current conditions as it is. So I'm sure moving to there, starting up as they were starting up their lives, was hard enough as it is. Moving back, moving somewhere else would be difficult as well.
Correct. Given there are certain barriers regarding education qualifications as well as adaptability between Middle Eastern and our nations. I must thank you for your contributions towards this program. Your participation on this stage is very important for our Bengali viewers to understand, as well as our global viewers. I must also thank Norman Floyd Burns, who is joining us almost every day on this very program, for his valuable time and contributions as well. Before I finish, I want to end with a fact. Of course, today is a significant milestone. Is April 6th. It includes the US declaration of war on Germany in 1917, as well as the first modern Olympic Games held in 1896 on this very day. With that being said, I am Shamsul Alam Panto signing out on International Affairs. I hope to see you all on tomorrow's program.